Professor Miriam Cooke mentioned in her keynote speech when she was talking about violence. And I think that one of the concepts that we can add to our discussion in the different sessions as well is the notion of brutality. Because I think violence takes us to the very macro. It's like you talk about violence, you talk about war, you talk about systemic violence against women in some societies, etc. But brutality takes you to the societal, and it takes you to the human nature, to the psychology, to the culture, and how it affects our attitude and the degree of our own human will, that we can actually change that. We can change the ideas, we can change the attitudes. And changing here does not only mean changing hearts and spirits, but also changing in terms of social change. Law is included, customs are included, norms are included, definitely religion is included as well. So how can we basically reform all that in order to take it further to its originally ultimate goals in terms of religion and culture and virtues, and also to the utmost of its elevation upon the animality of the behavior of some humans, etc. And I was remembering the story of Cain and Abel in the Quran, where actually it was very easy for one brother to kill his other brother. So it's brutality is very, very close to us if we don't realize that, and if we don't work on decreasing the level of brutality in our societies and culture. And I think this is very important. She mentioned Pure War by Paul Virilio, and I think it relates also to their life in terms of the state of exception of modern sovereign political entities. And added to that, how can we face pure war and the politics of exception, the politics of exception, state of exception, by civility, by promoting civility. And I think this is one of the important pillars of Umran. Even by languages, by teaching languages, you open up to different notions, to different modes of thinking, because language is a carrier of a culture in a way. So I'm very happy that we are trying to do that together, and Umran is one of the platforms for this. And I would like to introduce the three papers we have today. Saadet Iskandarivar from our in Haldun University, and she's originally from Iran. And we also have Sandra Matthew, St. Dominic College in India. And we have Professor Kalpana from Warheath College in India as well. And I would like to invite the first speaker, who is, according to the schedule, Saadet Iskandarivar. Her title of the paper is Investigating the Representation of Iranian Women in Iranian Cinema Post-Iranian Revolution. A very interesting title. So the floor is yours, Saadet, and please stick to the 15 minutes, please. Yeah, and focus on the main ideas of your paper. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Heba. I'm sharing my screen.
Okay, fantastic.
Good afternoon, everyone, dear guests and dear panelists. I appreciate Umran for giving me this chance to present my paper and share my ideas. The topic is about the Iranian cinema, but focus on how they represent women in cinema and the chronologies after the Iranian Revolution era. Actually, a breaking news came out from the BBC and exactly 1.5 years ago, and it became viral in the media on May 17, 2020. The news was about a girl was beheaded by her father for eloping. The same scenario was screened 12 years ago by Mr. Ayari, a movie titled Paternal House. Therefore, I saw the Iranian women still have been the core of domestic violence after this dramatic social and political changes during this recent 4 decades after the revolution. And then, so that made me to think about what is exactly the problem of women and how it has been addressed in the media. Because according to statistics, and women make up almost half of the Iran's population. So this is my humble attempt to address this issue and examine the profound problems of women, since after all those changes and we witness, women are not in the mainstream yet. I believe cinema has a dual function. So it represents the realities in the society, and also it provides the ideal model of the dominant ideology. Actually, the mass media practically plays the role of constructing and reproducing the social norms in today's social life. So as a female member of the society, I believe that there is a significant rhetoric towards women. This is right, this is wrong, the taboos, the customs, and all of them are shaping a woman's mediation in Iranian society. Okay. Sorry. Okay. So I start wondering, and this question arises here: that what is the cause and that makes to commit to those violence against women in Iran? So first of all, what comes to the mind is that Iran is more reliant on the patriarchal values. Actually, the male domination mindset that also put the religious values into themselves. I should say that even it's not limited to the male mindset, but it's also for female as well, because they have been educated like this. I can say maybe through the media. So their narration and the way they interpret the Islamic laws are more in benefiting males rather than women, which is according to their mind, not purely extracted from the Sharia. I believe those religious values need to be checked whether they impose according to the real ones or not. For instance, the mandatory hijab or other rules that limit the women's role in the society. In my research, I realized that these violences are more in a lower class because of the lack of education, perhaps, and sometimes the ethnic dimension are affected because they want to keep their honor through this way. Then the question is that why these women are silent and still tolerating this kind of violence? I think the answer is because they are marginalized by the mainstream. Then I can say that even though the cinema and movies function or according to those patriarchal mind, and so so that the effect is the honor killings, and it happens even though among the let's say believed citizen, unfortunately. The gender studies, which have recently received a lot of attention in the field of sociology, help us to become better acquainted with the common religion problems that are dominated in our society. And the connection between the cinema and gender studies is one of the important areas in the social societies. I can say that an important contribution of cultural and sociological studies is the connection between the cinema and gender. And given these points, the representation of gender in cinema is one of the social media topics about women. All right. In this research, my methodology was according to the Fisk semiology. So Fisk says, semiotic analysis aims to identify encoded meaning in audio visual production. There are three levels of the code. I briefly explained them. The reality or the social codes, the representation or technical codes, and ideology codes that's implemented to clarify what has accompanied with the position of the female signifiers. So what is code? Simply, it's a system of lawful signs that all members of a culture adhere to its rules and customs. What is the realities and what is the social codes? The fact that are to be broadcast on television and are already encrypted with the social codes such as appearance, clothing, behavior, speech, sound, and etc. The representation or technical codes are the social codes are encrypted by technical codes using electronic devices. like camera, lighting, dialogue, and other stuff. And the ideological codes are the codes that place those elements in the categories of cohesion and social acceptability. And some of these ideological codes are like individualism, patriarchy, race, social class, materialism, etc. So in this part, I would like to go toward my analysis about the movies, and you see the framework of the feast. Okay. The first movie, actually I have more analysis about the movies, but because of the shortage of time, I have to briefly talk about. The two women is the first movie I have for my studies. About the social codes, I can say that the main character of the film is Fereshte. She does not succeed in achieving her dreams in pursuing of her actual self. So why? This is the question. So she's representing a woman connotating the signs of an ideal woman. She wears chador, a black veil in Iran they are using. She's obedient to the men and the family, the man of the family, like the husband, the father, brother, and etc. And devote a lot of time for the family members, children, and spouse, and ignore herself and disaffiliation with the outside world, simple appearance and innocent face. And she's a woman with forgiveness, forgetfulness, and self-sacrifice, and adapting herself to other demands, and so on. The type of woman that is depicted in this movie is a woman in a patriarchal society who has been marginalized by male characters and obliged to either surrender to the modernity and struggle with the traditional values or get used to this status quo. To prove my argument, I can go toward the Fereshta's mother. Her mother is a simple and compromising woman who cares more about the what people say. So there is a scene. She, like Fereshte, the protagonist, is complaining about her husband's behavior, and she wants to divorce. And her mother, in reply, says, "Fereshte, what do people say?" She cares about it, and it's a big trauma actually in the Iranian society. I don't know about the others. The technical codes, as I have mentioned before, the technical codes are encrypting to the social codes or reality. So, for instance, there is a point about the mandatory hijab when the leading character was in Tehran, and when she was away from family and she was a student, and briefly she had her freedom. She was without veil, but when she goes back to the hometown, and even after her marriage, she had to wear this veil, and this is a micro presence of social norms of the country. And about the ideological codes, to create meaning, both representation and ideology are combined and to reach the reality. The mass media, which are basically governed by the authorities, in fact, consider the country's political condition and ideologies. And the authority of Iran, which is based on the religiosity, has built social unity and religious values. But the point is that in any multicultural society, besides religious values, there are traditional and ethnic values. And Iranian society, the two are intertwined. So the values that govern society are derived from not only the religion, but also the mixture of tradition and religion. Therefore, the meaning and realities that this kind of movies are seek is to limit the role of women to the values of home and family. And actually, Fereshte is the realist form of the female of the society. The second movie is The Paternal House. The film is about the honor killing, and the body of a girl who was killed for honor was buried in the basement of the house. Also, the basement, there is a concept about the basement in this culture, hides crimes, especially towards women for 4 years, and it changed the destiny of all family members for 7 decades. The paternal house, which signifies the sense of security that any child expects, actually becomes a father's graveyard. For decades, such a crime, the man of family, they were trying to hide. They did this crime to preserve their reputation. So the concept of reputation is very important, and this much important, let's say. And about the movie, it's like 5 episodes that all the stories are during the 50 or 80 years. And over those years, the movie shows the coherent progression of women, and it's gradually they gain power over the years, and the same patriarchal values ignoring and devaluing the demands of women, marginalizing women, are still prominent despite the advent of the modernity. And the other signification that the movie is representing is the culture of secrecy. In the movie, clearly, the spectator can touch the sense of the keeping the family members, especially women, away from the big secret that was buried in the heart of this house. The important point here is how the father of the family convinces himself to commit such a crime against his child. And unfortunately, such a crime has occurred many times in the real world. And the lack of a protective law, along with the short-sighted prospects of traditional culture, has made it persist. For instance, the news I have mentioned at the beginning, it was a 14-year girl, and she was beheaded by her dad when she was sleeping just because of the eloping. And the reason was because her father didn't want a girl child. About the ideological codes, the passage of time on the gender transformations are presented in this movie, and in fact, in addition to its storytelling, this movie has also undergone changes in the role of women in the contemporary history of Iran, and has chosen the family, which is a symbol of the society, and as an example to better present the evaluation of this process. Paternal house represents the patriarchal society structure of the family, which is a micro level of the society. And the point here is the only common sense of this family is the father, and in his absent, his son, and the other men of the family. Actually, they decide who is the murderer and who will be murdered.
I have to ask you to come to a close.
Okay, this is the last part.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. So I can say that there is a bilateral relationship between the society and media, especially cinema, that portrays the contemporary society like a mirror. So the 2 movies that I have studied, they are the representation of women in different periods after the revolution. And we see that the modernity has affected on them. For instance, we see that they have active presence in various social, political, artistic, and etc. fields. And in fact, there were an evolutionary paths of representation, and they have changed from a passive, and the voiceless woman to a social and educated activist. But the result of this study indicate that despite all of these contemporary female progress codes, inequalities are still being reproduced, and the represented female characters in these 2 films are like she's not able to solve her problems, and in fact she throws into the disarray and creates the disorders. And the women does not have independent intellectual power, and they are silent in front of the men, and men appear to be common sense who solve the problems. And the other point is that women always rely on men and cannot express themselves independently. And a woman is represented in a state of helpless. She's always worried, crying, and desire and astonishment, and in general she is an obedience. And in the coding of the studied movies, women are the creators of the condition that they cannot solve except by relying on men's wisdom. Therefore, women like Ferishteh who want to distance themselves from these values are rejected and marginalized. So to come to the conclusion, despite reflecting the realities of its society, cinema serves as a tool for power to reproduce its ideology. And stereotyping and naturalization strategies have been used to reinforce the patriarchal discourse to become a believer in the life of women. And if a woman wants to step out of this realm, she will have a fate like that of leading characters of the movie I have examined. So that the inferiority of women in the post-revolutionary period follows the inferior representation of the gender in media. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Saadet. Can you please stop sharing the screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. This was very interesting. I took some notes when you were talking, and I think that focusing on the ethnic and religious and traditional factors behind this situation and condition of women is very important. And I think that in many situations, as portrayed in the films that you mentioned, or even in the cases that we come across in our culture, and when we face such issues and problems and crimes, basically, is that there is no sense of the independence of the other individual. Yani, there is that sense of ownership. You know, the family thinks they own the children, so it's also a generational issue sometimes. Or men assume that they own their women, you know, so we come across problems like, for example, that they ask for the woman to put her income in the house if she's working, for example. So, and if you say, why is this the case? They say, because I allowed you the time, as if the time is basically a property. The woman is a property of the man, and her time is a property of the man. And hence, if he allows her to work, then she should put her income in the house. Yeah, it's like, it's not about compassion, it's about basically this sense of ownership. And I think that there is an issue about that, even issue in the relations of love and the relation of family. You know, sometimes men assume that women should be their wives forever. You know, it's like, no, I mean, at one point, people can disagree, you know, so it's that sense of taken for granted ownership of the people around you is actually very interesting as culture, and very disturbing as well, and definitely not from my perspective religious at all. So interesting how the visual is actually reproducing some of that, though the cinema producers usually and the cinema the cinema at large assumes that it has a progressive role, but sometimes either it undermines the putting forward the positive images or the positive messages, or sometimes when it overstresses it overdoes it. So it basically, the society does not accept the images in the cinema out of a reactionary rejection of the too much progressive ideas that people cannot swallow. So we are between these two different things, reproducing images or actually replacing them, and then hence society takes a step back and there is a sense of alienation from what is on the screen. So thank you very much for your interesting paper, and I should invite now the second speaker, who is Sandra Matthew. The title is The Exile's Text, Historical Fiction on Gender Violence. So Sandra is here, I assume. Please, Sandra, can you take the floor? I can see you. Can you open your video, please?
Can you see me, ma'am?
Yes, I can see you now. Welcome.
Okay, so actually, okay,
Please,
thank you, ma'am.
Be much more disciplined than the Iranians. And then stick to the 15 minutes, please. Saadet took 5 minutes more. Go ahead, Sandra, please.
Okay, okay, I'm sorry. Okay, before that, I would like to say something to all of you, that this is actually the first time I'm taking part in an international symposium. So there might be mistakes in my presentation.
Okay.
So because I'm actually a student and a literature student, actually, I'm pursuing my graduation in MA literature. So there might be mistakes.
One day
maybe
to see you as a chair of a panel. You will soon be in my place. Don't worry. Just go ahead and start your presentation.
Okay, so and even though I also have certain range issues also here, so I think I may not be share the screen, but I'll try doing that. Okay, let me check first.
Go ahead, Sabri.
Actually, the range problem. I think it's not getting open. Okay, no problem. I'll just start my
Please go ahead.
my talk. Okay. So my work is based on the Exiles, historical fiction on gender violence, which is by Christina Baker Klein. She's an American-based novelist, where she is an editor as well, and she is the author of 7 novels, and also she had edited around 5 fiction works, and her famous work is about is Orphan Train, which was published in 2013, and then The Exiles, which is actually my topic, and which was actually published in 2020. So as for the introductory part itself, she's talking about gender discrimination, where she's actually giving a definition on what is exactly called as gender discrimination, and then she tells about the violence faced by women in her work itself. And then she talks about the genocide which is actually happens in Australia, because this work is basically focuses on the old ancient Australia, the problems of the women faced in ancient Australia. And there she's telling about that so many women has been wiped out by this genocide. And then she tells about the societal rules which was existed in Australia, and not even she's telling about the Australian women, but also she's actually going through the every woman around the world, and she's telling the problems faced by them, and the marriage concept, especially she's telling about the problems in the marriages, especially the husband's extramarital affairs, then about marital rapes, and the abuses of on women from their in-laws, and so many other, and women are considered as a third class or a secondary factor in the societies. So she's talking about all these things. Then about the racism, which was actually existed in many of the developed countries, and or even in the Australia as well. And there that difference between that difference existed in between a black and a white woman, where that black woman should have was abused a lot, especially they have even though they were poor, so they had to work for the white master, and then they will be seduced by them. Then after having a baby, they will be thrown out of the house, and then they should they should live in a poverty. There's so many, and then they will be accused by the societies and everyone around them. So that is actually she's talking in this racism concept. Then again she's telling about the importance of giving education to a woman, and also that is the only way to empower a woman. That's what actually she's mentioning, that when a woman gets a proper education, then only she can become a leader, because she's telling that every woman have the potential or the capability to become a leader, but she's actually lacking the opportunities. Once she get an opportunity, she can do it better than women, so better than man. That's what actually she's telling. Then again she's telling about the modern era, because we are actually living in the modern era. She's actually going through a comparison between that ancient era and also with this modern era. And there she tells about that in this modern era itself, still that societal rules, the restrictions for women is existing, and these are all and she calls it as challenges faced by women in this modern era itself, because due to all these challenges, she had to in that challenges put forth by the societies, actually she had to wear this in her dress codes, in her talking, and she should be like this, and she should walk like this. if she is actually not obeying the rules, then she will be judged out by the societies and all these things. She's talking. Then she's tell about the death and malnutrition, which is about the ancient Australia, where it is actually mentioning there that many of the women, almost the death rate of the woman was high compared to men, and it was due to the poverty and malnutrition. And this is because they are not getting proper food, and that then they are like, and because of that, many of the women were physically weak, and thus they died a lot. Then another is pregnancy and lack of proper treatment, which is actually she's selling. And in that she's saying that when a pregnant woman, even though she's pregnant, but still she had to travel a lot, because at that time there might be a lack of due to the poverty, because so many of the people were poor at that time. So they have to, that woman should travel a lot to the hospitals, and in the hospitals they are not at all getting proper treatment because of the poverty, and as well as the lack of medicines and facilities and everything. So thus what happened is that after the delivery itself, the woman dies, and the child will be an unhealthy child which she gives birth. And then she calls poverty as a curse, because at that time usually with poverty still existing in our world, but still at that time poverty was very severe. So in that time that usually women should help their husband, so they also have to enter into the work, and there even whatever the work should be, it might be that in a mine or whatever it is, but then she had to do that. But due to this malnutrition and due to this continuous hard work that women had, even they had to do the household work, then after they have to enter on this hard works, there also women dies in that also. It also led to the death of so many women. So it was actually, so all of this was about the introductory part. Now we are just entering to the novel. The exiles, in this novel, she's actually describes about Australia, that how was Australia in that ancient time. Yes, ma'am, did you say?
Okay. We're hearing you, Sandra. Go ahead.
Okay. So we are just entering to the novel itself. So there she actually mentions about the ancient Australia, that how it was at that time. She's actually mentioning that she's actually telling about the country Australia. She's telling about the that particular, even though she was an American-based writer, but still she's actually telling that she's actually describing about the beauty of Australia and everything she was telling in that ancient time. Then she again describes about the condition of women in Australia. Even though she actually appreciates Australia, but still she's telling that she's actually accusing the customs existed and the problems and the sufferings of women in Australia due to, as in the introductory part itself, I have said about the racism and all other problems faced in their marriage life and everything. And then then she's actually introducing the main characters of this novel, especially it is 3 women. And in this novel, this entire novel is actually focusing through these 3 women, because they are the main characters. Especially it is Evangeline, Hazel, and Mathena. And Mathena is actually based on the real character. She's the real she was actually a character which was existed in the ancient Australia. She was she was an orphan, belonged to a poor family, and her parents was died. Then she ended up in an orphanage. So etc. That's where her story is actually going. And these 3 women end up, even though they are belong to different backgrounds, but still they ends up into a what they ends up okay, they ends up into a same place with similar problems. So that is what actually is happening. So the story of Evangeline is actually tells that she was actually a governess, and often she was an orphan. Then she doesn't have any family, so she was an orphan, and then she was working as a governess in the family. And there she was actually got raped by the eldest son of the family. His name was Cecil. Then then she discovers that she was pregnant. When she tells about him, but that he leaves him. He immediately tells that he is actually denying about all these things, and he leaves her and going to abroad. And then later she was actually accused of stealing, because Cecil, before seducing her, Cecil had given her a ring as a symbol of their love and all. So then when the family members saw this ring in her hand, they accused and thrown her out of the house. And then Evangeline had to travel long distance to the road, and then she ends up in a ship. And there she meets Hazel, which is actually the second character of this novel. And then she is actually a 16-year-old girl, and Evangeline was 21. And she was Hazel was actually a midwife, and even her mother was also the same. And she entered into her mother's job after her mother's death. Then Evangeline, after meeting Hazel, Evangeline got a great relief, and she's thinking that, okay, I feel so happy to meet her. So she thinks that she's the one whom she can share her feelings, her problems, and her sufferings. So actually she's actually getting into a soulful connection between them. Then another character is actually Martina. Then later, so they both this Hayes and Evangeline met in a ship actually, and the ship is moving on. Then they come across with Martina, and then Martina is also talking with these two girls, and then she is also sharing about her sorrowful life, her problems, everything she is telling. So actually, the novelist is actually telling that both these women ended up in a same place with similar problems, and they are actually deciding that they should escape from all this, and they are actually dreaming about a world which is actually free from all these kind of abuses, all these atrocities, everything, and a free world where a woman can live her life with complete freedom according to their wish and everything. So that is what actually their dream, and these women are ready to fulfill their dream at any cost, and they are even ready to fight against the society and societal concept and everything. So then they are deciding that. But later what happened is that we can see that even though they are moving towards, then a big storm arises, and Evangeline, at that time itself, she is actually going through a labor pain, and she gives birth to an unhealthy child, and she immediately dies at that time, because they can't even provide proper lack of hospitals, because in the mid of the water they can't do anything. But even though Hazel helps her, but still she can't also but Hazel can't help her, and then Evangeline dies. Then even though at the age of 16 itself, we can see that Hazel is actually a change of personality in her. She's actually taking the entire responsibility of that child, of Evangeline's child. And then she and Martina is actually taking an oath, taking a pledge that, okay, we have to we have to come out of all these problems just for Evangeline, for Evangeline itself. It's actually her dream. So we have to come out of this. And it will only be possible if we are ready to come out of, if we show the courage to do this. And thus the novel ends, and at the concluding part, we can see that both these women end up changing of fate. And then she ends the novel is that a woman is capable of doing everything which she wishes for, but the only thing is that she should provide opportunities. If she get opportunities, then okay, definitely she can do whatever she wants, and a woman is actually capable of doing it, even it's better than a man. That's what actually she concludes it. And then and also
Sandra, you have to
she actually,
so please try to bring it to a close.
Okay, ma'am. Okay. So as per the concluding, in the concluding part, she's actually gives her own opinion about the benefits of giving education to women, and also her concept of woman life and importance of family support for a woman and freedom, which are actually provided to women. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a very interesting portrayal of the main characters and the narrative of that novel. And I think that going through the historical process of the traditional societies or the native societies in Australia reminded me of two things. The first thing I was reminded by was the stolen generation, the story of how colonialism in Australia basically hijacked the little children from their Aboriginal tribes and wanted to turn them into white generation in the future to serve the white men and women. And there was a huge investigation about that in Australia about 20 years ago or so. And then eventually the government in Australia had to announce a public apology for the native Australians, how they were treated and how their children were taken away from them to civilize them in a way. It's a very dramatic historical event, and the same happened in Canada as well, with a little more difference in details. So I think when we're talking about such societies and what they went through, colonialism is very important to remember here. And its impact does not mean to romanticize the situation of women in traditional societies or in tribal societies of different parts of the world, but at the same time also not to forget that colonialism played a role, definitely not in a civilizing society, but sometimes the opposite. The second thing that came to my mind when you repeatedly mentioned the issue of motherhood and having children and the price women paid when they were basically slaves, and then later on when they were poor, poverty and its impact even after the end of slavery, etc., is a book that is very famous in trauma and healing titled The Body Keeps the Score. And it's written by Van der Kolk. And the book talks about different experiences with people who went through traumatic experiences, and how the body and the mind function, and the brain, and even sometimes the neurology of the brain functions during times of trauma, and then creates different types of biological sort of development of the individual. So the body keeps the score. It's not only psychological, it's also physical, not in terms of sort of being ill or suffering pains or something like that. No, actually, the body, as if it gets into our own brain, it gets into our own bodies, and sometimes even into our own genes. So there is a talk increasingly in trauma healing about the importance of tracing trauma across generations and eventually trying to close the circle and heal collectively in one lineage or in a society as well. So I think for a long time the issue of motherhood was transformed from care and being a blessing to being a burden, to being something women have to pay for actually instead of enjoying. And in some societies, women wasted their lives basically sacrificing for their children and putting up with a lot of injustices because they wanted to sort of keep their children safe. And eventually this resulted in a very miserable situation for women themselves. And I disagree with you a bit when you say that the message was that women should have opportunities, and if they are given the opportunities, they would be leaders. We don't want a society of leaders. We want a society of civilized people. And we want a society where people, if they decide to become full-time mothers, they would be respected. And if they decide to become career women, they would be respected. And if they decide to balance between career and home, they would be respected. And they will always have the choice. So I think that the notion of leadership is sometimes, it's too American for my taste, that everyone should be learning how to become a leader. I don't think that this is necessary. What we are aspiring, but definitely justice. And it's not about opportunities, it's also about struggles. So, and it's about paying prices for your choices in life, because there is always a price that you pay if you want to achieve social change. You wrote in the chat, I hope I did not disappoint you. No, you did not disappoint us, Sandra. I think that the presentation was actually very interesting. Maybe in the future it could have become more organized. Maybe in the future presentations you would have more to say about your own criticism and analysis of the work that you are addressing. And thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I will now move to the third presentation, which is the presentation by Professor Kalpana from Borghirs College, Tiruvallur University from India, and the title is Violence Exerted on Dalit Women in the Family and the Society, a study on Sivakami novel, The Taming of Women. So I'm looking forward actually to listening to this presentation. Go ahead, Professor Kalpana, please.
Thank you, ma'am. A very good evening to all the learned professors and scholars here. And I am honored to be here. It's a wonderful opportunity given to me by Umran. Thank you so much for this wonderful stage. And so let me present my screen.
Yes, we can see the screen now. I will be strict with time, Professor.
Thank you, ma'am.
So I trust that you will stick to it.
Yes. So my topic is exertion of violence on Dalit women in the family and the society, a study on P. Shivagami's The Taming of Women, originally called Anandai. So women and patriarchy. One is not born, but rather becomes a woman, says Simone de Beauvoir. And also, Bell Hooks in her essay, Understanding Patriarchy, says, this is all about imperialistic, white, supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal ideology. So where she misses out all the plural identities of women. And also we have Kimberly Crenshaw, who says intersectionality as a conceptual framework, which includes plural identities of women. So here we're talking about class, caste, race, ethnicity, and education. And in my paper, I've zeroed down only on class and caste. So we have the portrayal of Dalit women in literature. So we have two groups of people here. One is the non-Dalit writers writing about Dalit people, and the other is the Dalit writers. So here we look at the difference between how they sympathize and empathize. So as you see in front of your screen, we have non-Dalit writers who are sympathizing, who are victimizers, who are non-agentic, who are underpowered, who lack the identity, who are vulnerable, who are marginalized and easily exploitable. And we have a third person narrative here. We have minor characters included here. And we also see victims of violence at all forms and levels. And on the other side, we also have empathizing Dalit writers who are empathizing with the characters, which is more important for a Dalit person to read his own book, or for a Dalit writer to see himself in his writing. And we have victims of violence, and we have people who are fighting back for their rights, and we have agency to talk back, which is very important here because we're talking about identities here. And we have the identity given by the society and taken by them, which is a difference between non-Dalit writer and Dalit writers. And the most important thing is it is autobiographical, in which the novel that I have taken here from P. Shivagami, The Taming of Women, it is the first person narrative, and we can actually see double and triple marginalization also. And now as we talk about violence and marginalization, we have a scholar, Vaishali Shivkumar, who says, a woman is a Dalit from the beginning to the end. There is no change in that at all. So here in India, we talk about caste and we talk about class. Caste, which is the most demoralizing aspect in a woman's identity. And we have caste disparities which lead to violence against lower caste women. So we are talking about Dalit women here whose identity is the journey of deep darkness and beholds the dreams of sunrise. The revolt of Dalit women is not person-centered, but society-centered. We have loads of Dalit women writers here in India. Let me name a few people over here. We have Babitai Kamble, we have Urmila Power, we have Gogu Shamla, we have Shivagami, we have Bama, and many more Dalit writers. And when we read all these writings, we cannot see a person who's like being concentrated upon. But we have a whole society here, and we only hear the voices of the whole society here. So we have the United Nations, which defines violence against women as any act of gender-based violence that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, or mental harm. So we're going to talk about all these three, the physical part, the sexual aspect, and the psychological aspect too. And we have Professor Mangalam, who rightly observes that Shivagami's fiction, Anandai, or which is called The Taming of Women, which documents violence against women within the domestic space. So we all women see domestic space as the best place to be safe in. But here it is not that, which it is not the case in this novel. So we see different types of domestic violence here, and we're going to look at the physical, psychological, economic, and sexual abuse. So women have been assaulted and women have been abused in all these areas, and that is where we're going to zero down in. So as Bell Hooks says, we're going to talk about the physical violence which we see in this novel. Women are always hit by men to put them in their place. I repeat, to put them in their place and teach the natural way of living. It looks like that we are set to be so. This is how it should be so, but it is not the case. Patriarchy makes people to pursue animalistic behavior where the dehumanization can be perceived as a skill. So we are talking about animalistic behavior here when we talk about patriarchy. And women are silenced by the physical violence caused by men. Every women character in the novel is hit by the male member of the family. So this is not just happening in just one household. We see every household here where women characters are hit by the male member, again, to put them in their place. Anandai advises her daughter. So when we're talking about the psychological violence here in this novel, we have the main protagonist, Anandai, who advises her daughter, Dhanam. When you are born a woman, you have to learn to control your tongue and hands. You don't want to do so, then be prepared for the kicking. That is what she advises her daughter when her daughter is being beaten up by her husband. She advises her daughter not to use her voice to protect herself, rather trying to silence her by stating if she uses, she will have to face the consequences. How bad is that? This conversation inflicts pain on the daughter's psyche, which degrades her for using her agency. So this is what we learn. You use your agency, then you're silenced, then you're being put in your place. The language used in the novel indicates animalistic, dehumanized behavior of patriarchy inflicted to oppress women. Let's talk about the economic violence. Women in the novel are dependent on their husbands or male members of the family. Being an Indian, it is quite normal to see here that the dependence of women on their husbands is quite common here. We're not allowed to be independent. For instance, Periyannan, who is the husband of Anandai, having all the money, denies monetary expenses of the family in order to show Anandai that she cannot imagine being an independent woman and should always depend on him. And then let's talk about the sexual violence here. Sexual coercion in the novel is represented as an act to keep women in their place. Consent of a woman over her sexual health is never seen as a matter of consideration at all. For instance, we have Lakshmi here, who is basically a prostitute and is being like kept under Periyannan's control. She is a sex slave who is hit by Perianan whenever she defies him. Even though he knows that she is a prostitute and tries to move out of his hold, he pulls her back by hitting her physically and keeps her as a slave at his home. So that is the sexual violence which we see in the novel. And then we move on to the identity, voice, and agency in the novel, which is initially the identity of the protagonist Anandai lies in the role of a victim. So we see a victim here. She resists the violence of her husband and acts as a spokesperson for herself and her competitor Lakshmi, because Anandai being the wife and Lakshmi, her competitor, who is inside the home, she talks for both of them. Velayamal, the mother of Periyanan, has her voice, agency, and an identity as a woman as she is economically independent. Personally, I just love this person called Velayamal, who is the mother of Periyanan, who is a very dominant person. Being a woman, she is economically independent and she's got the agency for herself, wherein she, in the entire novel, wherein she raises her voice against the son and shows him that she is a very independent woman. And we have a character called Vadakatyal, whose son-in-law abandons a daughter and grandchild to escape from the stress of his life, which a lot of men do these days, whereas Pungavanam chooses to live an independent life. So we have different characters in the novel who try to be independent, who try to escape, who try to be dependent, and who try also to be silent. So we also see women who are silent sufferers of the violent patriarchal system in the novel. Home, which is considered to be the safest place for women, and they are advised not to leave home after sunset, which is normal here in India. The novel depicts the view that the world is an unsafe place for women. But here, Lakshmi, the prostitute, considers the outer world as a more safe place to live in, rather than just being at home as a slave inside the home. Every woman in the novel feels that home is the most unsecured and torturous place, as we see a number of characters being assaulted by men. To conclude, The Taming of Women mirrors the dehumanization of women and the exertion of violence by dominant and violent patriarchy instead of promoting resolutions. Concerns the safety of women, which is any place can be safe, and change has to happen from one's inner self. So it's not outside home, so it's not inside home. Changes has to be done. Women should have their voice and agency to resist and reject domestic violence and also locate the problem of patriarchy. By doing so, we can lead a peaceful and blissful life. Thank you.
Okay. Can you please stop sharing the screen if you are done with your conclusion?
I've stopped sharing now.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think that what you highlighted is actually very much relevant, interestingly, to some Arab literature as well. You know, in some novels, we can see that it's a series of oppression. Not only in terms of the image, it's sometimes in terms of the financial, in terms of the marriage, in terms of the relation within the family. And sometimes there is a series of oppression on behalf of the elderly women towards the young one. You know, so it's like, there are so many similarities when you were talking about the different characters and the different images and the different challenges that I find across cultures, which is very interesting and painful at the same time. And I think that giving the voice to those who belong to the specific social group or ethnicity or tribe or class, sometimes it highlights the potential of their empowerment. As you mentioned, it's not only about how to narrate, but also who is narrating, who is the narrator, and how do they see women. As you mentioned, if the writer is Dalit, then they foster the issue of how women resist, how women speak out, you know, speak up for themselves. And when they are represented in other literature, they are sort of, you know, very fade characters or so. So I think this is very important. It reminds us of the work of Spivak, on the subaltern, the voice of the subaltern, and in literature, it's very obvious. Yeah. Thank you very much. This was very interesting, and actually the journey that we had from cinema to literature in the novel on Australia by an American, and then your discussion of how giving a voice to those in creative writing and in literary realm, to those who actually belong to the community where women are suffering, highlights very much the genuine potential as well for liberation. I would open the floor if there are any questions or comments. They are most welcome. I know we have a few minutes to close the session, but we can take some comments if someone is willing to comment. So many interesting issues have been put forward. Violence is not always direct. Sometimes it is by sort of exercising domestic violence on women, or violence in society, or abusing the body of women and the biology of women against them, not honoring it. But also sometimes violence is structural. In terms of the case that you mentioned, Professor, in your presentation, sometimes it's how some groups are placed in society. So women actually suffer double discrimination because of their situation in the society, etc. So can you help me, Rajiv, if there are any comments or questions in the chat? So Matiso, why don't you just comment directly instead of writing in the chat? I would like to hear your voice and your comment.
Thank you very much. Thank you for giving
the floor. Bring some insight from Africa, from sub-Saharan Africa.
Of course, that is why I have commented on it, because we try to see that, Africa, I talk about sub-Saharan Africa, so patriarchal societies is still dominant. So you find such a kind of situation as it has been described in the presentation. So you find that manhood domination still has a great place in the society. So the way of dominating all familial affairs still have the negative impact to the development of the continent and the society in general. So what has been said really happened even if in Africa, and also maybe in other parts of the world. So something that should be done is to write many things, to write many theories which can give some light to give up or to sensitize those people to abandon such a kind of behavior, which is not really suitable with 21st century. That is what I would want to tell about that. Thank you.
It's very interesting when you say it's not how things sometimes are not related to 21st century. I was just discussing a text with my students that was a text on urban sociology, actually, and the title was Medieval Modernity. Sometimes we assume that we moved to a specific new age, while actually we carry along with us many features of previous societies in terms of the separation and segregation in the urban space or the customs that we actually follow. And there are so many parts of the history that continue with us, including oppression, but including also interesting virtues and important values, but also some social formations change face, but they are at the core, they are very much similar, which sometimes is described in the writings on women by patriarchy. Patriarchy has an ability to actually survive across ages and across civilizations as well, to a great extent. Thank you very much for this contribution. Are there any? I can try to view more as gallery, so I can see if someone is raising their hand. Any comments?
Ma'am, can I have a comment about Kalpana ma'am's presentation?
Go ahead, please.
Okay, I'm Shafir. Actually, I'm from Kerala. Actually, all these academic discussions is quite away from this reality. Because Kalpana ma'am was telling that all think that women is not safe after 7. It is the duty and responsibility of the state to make safety and security of women in the in the night. But the state fails in that. The state is not able to maintain safety and security of the women in the night. So what shall the society do? Because we all know that women is not safe and secure in the night in the nighttime. So even in that condition, the academic discussions are for allowing the women or the ladies or the girl to be free in the nighttime. How can we compare this? Because academic discussions can tell anything, but practically it's very tough. For example, I can tell my personal experience. I have a sister. She will be coming from the college by 5:30. If it is 5:35 p.m., my mother will be anxious and she will be calling her. And if she is not taking the phone, if she is not attending the phone, she will be very anxious. And that anxiety will be passing from her to me. We all know that the media is projecting all these news that is violations against women or this violence against women. So there is no other way that for their safety and security, we have to control them. That is the only remedy before us. That is practical life. Academic discussions can tell that yes, you have to liberate women. There must not be any discrimination of giving preferences for men in the night. But the social condition is like that. What is the solution for that? Because from personal experiences, we can realize that the anxiety which is in our mind, the fear which is in mind, it's something. I can cite one more examples. And there were 2 laws passed by the Legislative Assembly of Kerala. One states that the woman must not be compelled to work in the textiles after 7. And the state tells that they are not safe after 7.
Okay, where is the state then if it's not providing security?
Then the same state or the court passed their judgment saying that the girl students must be allowed to go for second shows. That is starting at 9:30 or 9 o'clock. So simultaneously, there is two laws, 2 judgments. One is a law, one is a judgment. So one law says that women are not safe to do job after 7. And at the same time, women must be allowed to go for second shows, or the girl students in hostels. That was for that must be allowed to go for second shows after 9:30. Is that contradictory? So there is contradiction in lawmaking also. So
yes, I think that what you actually is what you're asking is actually very much also posing the question again of urbanity. Posing the question of, did urbanity and modernization processes actually liberate women? Did the state, the modern state or the territorial state after independence secure the spaces to give the potential for women who want to be more present in the public sphere or in the economic sphere to seize these opportunities safely? So I understand what you're saying. I mean, when sometimes it's not about patriarchy, sometimes it's about you personally as Mohammed being concerned about your sister or about your daughter. So this is understandable. And this raises the issue of the role of women in shaping the public space as well, and their struggles to shape that public space. I have to move to Priya. Priya has been raising her hand for some time. Priya Robert, please go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. And the sir was asking a question, and he was also commenting on Professor Kalpana's paper, and he's been asking a question to her, stating that how women can be safe in a public place after 7 or something. So my answer for that would be, raise your sons as a human being. That's what you could do to make your daughter safe. And the dehumanization process is happening from home, and you are doing the term called benevolent sexism, where you are trying to keep us in control, keep women in control. Why can't you control men? Yes, it is an academic session, but then the reality is what he said. The social conditioning is what he said. But the actual fact is, make or raise your sons to be human beings and treat women equally in a public space. And then the society could be safe even at 12 or even at 2 or even at 5 in the midnight or in the morning. So it is not about time, rather it is about how we look at women, how women are allowed to be in the public space. So thank you for the opportunity, I think.
Thank you, Priya. I think that it's also related to the role of the state. I'm a political scientist by training, and I always say that I see the state on the street. I see the state in the degree of dignity that we enjoy in the services provided, in the securing of the space day and night. So I have the right to go for a walk at 3 o'clock in the morning if I wish to. You know, sometimes I have a long day, I have been working late, and then I feel that I want to have a walk before going to sleep, for example, midnight or so. Why not be able to go out safely? You know, and even if you are talking about the Islamic history, we have the early morning prayer, the Fajr prayer. You know, women used to go to Fajr in groups. They were not prevented from going to the mosque for prayer in Fajr. And this means actually that the society secured the spaces for women to be able to do so. So sometimes we do not realize or we mix the role of the state with the role of the society. As you mentioned, prayer culture. And at the same time, we understand the concerns of Muhammad. We understand the concerns of families who want to see their girls being educated or working, but at the same time, there are the concerns of safety and security. And it's all only through democratic struggles by men and women that we can actually grant this civic public sphere to be hospitable, to be accommodating for women and men, children and elderly. In a way that that grants dignity for all. We are not asking for a fight between men and women. It's not about a war between the two sexes, but it's rather a notion of citizenship that we are promoting, I guess, in Umran and in other circles that we are participating in. I guess I have to close the session now. So I thank you. I thank the three speakers for their very interesting presentations, Sandra specifically, for her young experience that reminded me of the first time I presented something. I was shaking basically, and I doubt that anyone understood what I was saying. So you reminded me of myself, Sandra. Bon courage, as they say in French. Stay tuned and keep on the good work, and inshallah you'll be a prominent scholar in the future. Thank you, Saadet. Saadet is one of my daughters in the Haldun University. Very proud always to have you. And it was the first time I listened to you, Kalpana, Professor, and it was very much it educated me about the topic that you were talking about. Thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity, Rajiv. The floor is yours now. I step down. I can't hear you, Rajiv. There is something wrong. No? You should unmute yourself again.
Am I audible now?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, now.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Heba, Heba Raouf, for sharing this session, and all the presenters who gave the voice to people and addressed the issues that we have in society. And thank you very much, Muhammad. It was very nice. I think that you pointed out that the law and governance is very important, rather than, because still society has not reached the awareness of educating their children, but it can be done by the law and governance. And thank you very much, Professor Kalpana, for talking about agency. We will have 30 minutes break we were supposed to have, but we would like to request you to have 20 minutes break because we have exceeded our time. So we will have a 20-minute virtual lunch break, and then we will see again on this platform. So thank you very much and see you. Assalamu alaikum.